President Trump's auto tariffs are here, and that means
a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff.
But no car, not even a US-built Ford F-150, is 100%.
Yes, sir. You just found it. In a course with you. Let's chat. Welcome to the In the Course Show. I am your host, Mr. B. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we have a very exciting show for you. This has been a pretty reckless week, especially for the U.S. economy, as all markets are down, not just in the U.S., but around the world. What are the reasons? What's causing that, you would say? Of course, it has everything to do with Trump's tariffs. Trump has officially released what he calls Liberation Day earlier this week. And in Liberation Day, it meant that he was assigning reciprocal tariffs to all the countries around the world where there was a trade imbalance between the U.S. and them. The problem at its core is that the U.S. charged very little tariffs when products and services are exported into the U.S. But on the flip side, other countries charge us high tariffs when we attempt to import products made in the U.S. into their markets. And so that creates a trade imbalance. And so Trump, in an effort to resolve the problem, has assigned or signed into law an executive order that makes reciprocal tariffs the law of the land, in a way to sort of reconcile that imbalance and motivate manufacturers to move back into the country. Now, that is going to have some trade-offs, but I think his overall plan is to essentially reduce, the dependency on other countries to produce products for us, and also to create jobs here in the U.S. where people can actually get the middle class strong again. But obviously, with those tariffs, it's something that trickles down and increases the cost of all the products that we buy. One of the areas that is hit particularly hard is the auto industry. Today, I have a video that I'm going to react to that actually breaks down. It's about an 8-minute video, but it breaks down the impact of those auto tariffs for those who's not following along. So it essentially simplifies it. With that said, let's jump right into it. I would like to call a very insightful video on the issue at its core. As the video explains, it's not as simple. The tariffs is not as simple as it may seem, right? Obviously, with a stroke of a pen, he puts the tariffs in place and all of a sudden the markets go haywire. Well, that's because in a global economy, things are interwoven in such a way where all the parts for a car, for instance, and this is an American-made car, a Ford car, is coming from 26 different countries because each component to the car is being manufactured somewhere else based on whatever tax deals, tax breaks that they've gotten to make it abroad. Now, I think there's a couple of issues that Trump also has to address. Companies typically leave a country to set up things in other country because of the cost to do business in their own country. So that's related to high taxes or over-regulation. Now, Trump is dealing with the tax issue as he's looking to reduce the taxes, but also when you have things like unions are interested in obviously getting employees the highest wages as possible. And sometimes it's effective and sometimes it isn't, because those unions will use strikes and other tactics to negotiate. And I do think the union issue could be something that needs to be addressed, because when the unions are acting, in their own interest and they're demanding these higher wages and things of that nature and calling strikes, now the company is not productive. They can't make the product because their workforce is not available. And sometimes companies are bootstrapped or shackled because they're having internal employment issues with union boards and different types of organizations there. So yes, lower taxes is going to make sense. Yes, maybe the tariffs will ultimately bring the manufacturing back in town, but you have to ask yourself, the manufacturing being back in the US, is that advantageous for the company because of all these other factors? Overregulation being one. Sometimes some of these EPA regulations and emissions and things of that nature, those regulations sometimes make it hard to do business because the companies have to conform to those regulatory boards' demands. And it may be too costly for them to do it and still make a affordable product that consumers would want to invest in. So you have overregulation, you have unions, and some of their demands, and then you have obviously taxes. Those are, to me, three factors that would be a deterrent to having a company manufacture their products in-house. And I think Trump is dealing with the tax issue, right? And he's essentially incentivizing those companies or penalizing those companies for making their products outside of the country and then shipping it back into the country. So now they're going to have to pay a tax. The price is going to go up, right? And now people may not buy the product because it's too expensive to buy it, and they would rather go elsewhere and buy a product that's locally made. But for the people that's within the country, there's still things like, okay, are they able to be competitive with other countries who's making products that they're turning out at a far cheaper price point, so their margins are better? And now can the United States companies compete with the efficiencies and the price points for the work being provided at some of the other countries like the China or India or some of these more major hubs? These are all factors that I think Trump needs to consider. But at its core, my take is that what he's doing is the right thing because, people need to have jobs. People need to have work. People need to be able to provide a living, right? Especially in a country that does so much for the world. Essentially, these tax funders, these taxpayers are who is essentially distributing a portion of their income to help other people, right? And a lot of times, some of these taxes that's collected by the government is for wasteful spending, and and it doesn't really serve any good, right, in terms of what they're choosing to allocate those payments towards. But they can't be taxed if they're not working. If people are in desolate areas and there's no jobs, then you see a spike in the drug usage, and people are depressed and they're on antidepressants, and all these different things are happening because they're not working, they're not being productive, they're not doing working with their hands and being useful. And so it is depleting to a society, and it really affects it. So I think at its core, Trump is within his right to at least address the issue. And this is an issue where the United States is being taken advantage of by a plethora of countries around the world, and he does need to address it. So I applaud him for that. To me, I hope he addresses the other factors as well, because it's not just as simple as reducing the taxes or imposing other players from being able to participate in your market with these high tariffs, but it's also addressing the core issues, the union issues, the overregulation issues that are deterring companies from wanting to manufacture in the US. Hopefully he has an answer for those, because I definitely feel like it will move in that direction. On the flip side, the argument is, the stock markets are crashing, people are losing money, things are going to be more costly, at least for a period of time, and there's a level of uncertainty that is going to come into effect. Now, we don't know how long, as each country may take some retaliatory measures to combat Trump. And we don't know if all of this being done at the same time will ultimately have a negative impact on us. That's to be determined, but a lot of people speculate that that's where it's going. So for that reason, I would recommend maybe phasing into it, work on a continent. You know, he's got 4 years in office. Maybe choose 1 year and focus on a particular continent. I don't think it should take that long. And then choose another year and focus on another continent. That way you have, you know, alternatives. Should your supply chain be affected in one area, you can potentially source things from another area once you've resolved your trade differences with them. So to me, that would be a more effective approach. But I mean, the guy's a billionaire. He's done business. He's got a lot of smart, brilliant people around him. And if they're advising him and about this approach, you know, who am I to tell him that it's not a good one? I mean, at this point, all we have to do is wait and see, because he is taking a gamble. He's shooting big for the stars here. If it works, you know, I think he secures power for the Republican Party for some years to come. If it doesn't work, it's going to be a bloodbath at the next elections. So that's all I have today. Thank you for joining us, and I definitely encourage you guys to like and subscribe.